Hi, this is Jonathan Tripodi. Welcome back to Freedom from Body Memory, Insights Edition, Episode 9. Today's topic is suppression, and we're going to be diving into the mechanism of how our body internalizes and quarantines the experiences in our life that are overwhelming or painful. First of all, suppression for many years was thought to be isolated to the mind, and specifically the central nervous system. That the memory of an experience was somehow stored in the mind. What we're talking about is how memory is not isolated to the mind, but actually stored energetically in the cells of the body. And therefore, the term body memory is referring then to suppressed memory in the body. And so we talked about experience having multiple components. There's a physical component, an emotional component, and then there's more of a mental component. And so you can see that the past interpretation of suppression really just involved the mental part, the actual cognitive component to memory. But when it comes down to body memory, we're looking at the sensations of an experience and the emotions of an experience, and how sensation and emotion are composed of energy. They're brought to life in the body in the form of energy. And so when that sensation or emotion is overwhelming, that energy is stored. We've been talking in the recent episode 8, how experiences are born theoretically in the human energy field. And so they are already represented in the form of light, frequencies of light in the energy field. And then that light is transmitted into the cells of the body. And then that light is converted into electromagnetism by the collagen network of the body, which is the fascial system, the connective tissue system, and then transmitted to every other cell of the body at a billionth of a second, so instantaneously. Certainly the nervous system is encased in connective tissue, so what information is transmitted through the connective tissue system is then conveyed to the nervous system. And so this theoretical model of the transmission of human experience from the light body to the physical body was discussed in episode 8. Now we're going to talk about what happens when an experience becomes overwhelming, and then what happens on an anatomical level. So let's begin that discussion. First of all, there's different ways to respond to overwhelm. And the first way we're going to discuss is the fight or flight response. And the fight response suggests taking assertive action. You know, if you get overwhelmed, you take assertive action in response to change or deal with the overwhelming experience. Let's say your clothes catch on fire. The fight response would essentially be you running to get water and to put it out, or rolling on the ground to put it out. The flight response is the action to run away from the threat. rather than to deal with it directly. So moving away from a threat, let's say that you're walking through the woods, you hear gunfire, maybe a hunter, and it alarms you. You turn back and walk the other way. Okay, so you move away from the threat. Now, let's take this into let's give a more practical example of how fight or flight might show up in your home. Okay, let's dial ourselves back to childhood, because the interesting thing about childhood that's somewhat unique is that we're in the most dependent state of our life. We're dependent on those taking care of us for food, for shelter, for protection, and anything else that goes wrong. Like we need clothing, but I mean, if we have to go to the hospital, if we get sick, we need an adult to take care of us. So we're in a very dependent state as a child. But let's say in our environment, in our home, as a child, we get overwhelmed. Let's say one of our parents is challenged with stress, or maybe is dependent on drugs or alcohol, or maybe is emotionally unstable, and we're exposed to that as a child. And as sensitive children, we might react to that. When mom or dad yells, we might be overwhelmed by that. Okay, so let's do the fight or flight response here in this situation. Let's say you're a young child and your parents are yelling or arguing and it's overwhelming you. You might simply say, "Hey, mom and dad, you're overwhelming me with your loud voices, and can you please keep it down or speak to each other in a more calmer way? Or can you take your conversation to a more private setting?" Now that's asking a lot for a young child. And so you can see how that option to confront that overwhelming experience really isn't viable for most children. So the next response would be flight. So the child says, "Well, gee, maybe I should remove myself from the room where the argument's taking place." So you might go to your own room, close the door, crawl under your bed, go into a closet, play with your, toys, and kind of enter your own world as a means of moving away from the overwhelming experience. You might even leave the house, go out in the backyard, go visit a friend down the street. Okay? Now, those are the two options, fight or flight. Now, the next option happens when you feel helpless or powerless to fight or flight. So if you can't assert yourself to change the situation by directly addressing the overwhelm or by moving away from it, you freeze. And the freeze response is the first sign or it's the beginning of suppression. It's the beginning. It's when the body begins to receive the command, protect me, because I'm helpless to protect myself. And so this is when suppression becomes active. Now, let me be straightforward. There's a lot of theories about suppression. Okay, but as far as I know, there's not a lot of conclusive evidence about the totality of suppression. No one really knows clearly and definitively how a body and a mind suppress an overwhelming experience. But there are insights, and that's what we're going to discuss in this edition. What are those insights? Well, if we go back to our theoretical model of experiences being born in the energy body and then transmitted almost practically instantaneously into the physical body, we can look at what are the mechanisms for which the light enters the physical body. Because if the freeze response is a suppression of an experience, we would be suppressing the circulation of light into the body. Specifically, those frequencies of light that are conveying the overwhelming experience. So if you're physically overwhelmed by physical pain, or you're overwhelmed by emotional pain, then the physical emotional blueprints that are in the form of light and frequency are being regulated like water through a faucet. Too much water, turn the valve down so that the water becomes less and less. And if you need it all the way off, you just turn the knob all the way. Well, what is the valve for light into the physical body? Well, we talked about the chakras, the portals, the subtle energy portals that align through the midline of the body. And we also talked about every cell of the body being a mini chakra, because light has photon emissions are occurring on a regular basis in our cells. They're measured. And so we talked about the oscillation of the DNA, the accordion-like movements of DNA, and how every oscillation translates to a photon of light being pumped into the body. So the theory, because it hasn't been conclusively determined, is that the DNA is a pumping mechanism for human experiences that are born in the light body, and they're pumping those experiences into the physical body where they become physically embodied in terms of through our five senses. So when our senses get overwhelmed in the body, we can regulate the flow of light into the body that's overwhelming. So what you see here then, it might translate into less oscillations of DNA, less light being pumped into the body. Okay, that's part one. Part two is that the body might have such an intelligence that it can discriminate that the body is not wanting to have the light completely regulated. It just wants you to regulate the specific frequencies that are overwhelming to you. So that could be an option too. But if you've ever seen somebody who's depressed, it's like the light is being put out. There's a sense of darkness or being dim. And I believe that this translates to a person who has gone into the freeze response to such an extent that there's not a lot of light being transmitted into their body. They're so protecting themselves from the pain and suffering from their past that they've hyper-regulated the flow of light from their light body into their physical body. This theory of mine is also built upon the observations of my clients who, when they release body memory, almost always look lighter. You can see the light in their eyes. You can almost see a glow around them, meaning that more light has been allowed to flow into their body and through their body. It becomes visible. But in addition to that, they also feel lighter, like as a weight. So there's these two tangible experiences of looking lighter and brighter and feeling lighter in terms of weight that translate to the release of body memory. And people who are in suppression and have been for many years would describe the opposite. They look dimmer. Some will feel like they're dying inside. They don't feel as alive as they used to. And they also feel heavy. There's a heaviness that develops in the body when you're in a state of tension all the time that's associated with suppression. Okay, so mechanism of suppression begins by regulating the flow of light into the physical body. Now, some light has already entered the body, and that's how you had the experience of physical pain or emotional pain. It already has entered the physical body. So, although you may regulate the flow of light into the body, there may be more of that painful experience that's still in your energy field that hasn't yet passed into the body. But then there's, what do you do with the light, the information that already came into the physical body? The energetic blueprint of your pain that already entered, what do you do with that? Well, now we're going to look at what I call the quarantine process. How the physical body quarantines the energy of painful experience as an act of suppressing it. One of the things that is consistent with every human body is that there is the sign or symptom of tension in every body. Physical tension that continues day in and day out. Okay? And so when you think about protective responses to past experiences that are remaining active years after the experience has taken place, that means all of our childhood experiences that were painful or overwhelming, some of our adult experiences, that these protective responses remain active, keeping those experiences suppressed. Well, we talked about in one of the episodes that we discussed body armor. And the armor and body armor consists of muscle tension, chronic muscle tension. So that's one of the signs of suppression. Now, muscle tension is a pinprick reaction to pain. So if you take a needle and you prick yourself, you're going to recoil and contract in your muscles. If you are, what I'm saying is, if you have emotional pain, it's the same as sticking yourself with a needle. Your body reacts the same way. Now, muscle cells are embedded within connective tissue or fascia. We've discussed that in the recent past episode. And so what happens is the fascia is drawn tight as muscles remain in a constant state of contraction. And that puts a strain into those fibers of fascia. And the fibers of fascia react by getting thicker. They produce more collagen. Collagen is what scar tissue is made of. So the tissue actually gets thicker and harder, and then it forms cross links between fibers. There's cross links of collagen that bond those fibers together. And that limits the range of motion of those fibers. So in addition to muscle tension, you get fascial restriction and thickening of the fascia. And then the last component is a hardening of the fluid that exists outside the fascia and within it. Fascial fibers are hollow and they contain fluid. Under the constant strain of muscle tension and under the constant suppression of past experiences, meaning that command to suppress when it's constant, causes a muscular reaction of chronic tension and a fascial response of fascia getting thicker and restricted. And then on a fluid level, causes the fluid to get solid, crystallized. So it's my supposition that body armor is a quarantining response to a person who feels helpless to change a painful or overwhelming experience. I can't change it. I have to endure it. I have to live with it. How do I manage to cope? I'm going to quarantine the pain so that it's not in circulation. It's not something that I'm in a constant experience of. And it's my supposition that within the contracted muscles, restricted and thickened fascia, and hardened fluids of the body is the quarantined energy of our past pain and suffering. Okay, well, what other proof is there of that supposition? Well, the proof is that when you place your hands on body armor, armored tissues and fluids, and you apply your hands in a certain way, meaning gently at first, and then progressively deeper as the body allows. The body armor goes through a reverse process. The fluid that's hard becomes fluid again. The muscles that are contracted relax, and the fascia that became restricted and bonded together unbonds. And what happens when that armor begins to dissolve is people have a body memory recall. They remember an experience from their past that was painful, not always cognitively, but physically and emotionally. So, as we discussed, memory in the body, in the physical body, not just in the central nervous system, in the physical body consists of energy. So it's the energy that we're suppressing in the body. It's getting quarantined. And when you unquarantine it through a safe touch that progressively de-armors the body, that energy then is recirculated into the body and becomes experienced momentarily and then processed and released. Now, that gets rid of the quarantined energy in your body, but then there's also the energy in your energy field that got regulated, that wasn't allowed to fully process into the body. And so that's where the gentle approach to de-armoring comes in, because if it's gentle and progressive and meaning that if it's not forced, then a person can enter a place of feeling safe, so that they can that command to regulate the flow of light into the body can change from no to yes. So the protective response of suppression has two primary mechanisms. One, decrease or eliminate the flow of light into the physical body that is communicating the painful experience. Two, quarantine the energy that has already entered. Transformation of body memory has to do with these two mechanisms undergoing a shift. So with the de-armoring, it has to do with muscles relaxing, fascial bonds unbonding, and the hardened fluid melting. And then the second thing it has to do with is ultimately supporting a person to enter a safe place where protection isn't needed, where they feel safe enough not to protect themselves. And in that state of surrender, the flow of light is reinstated. And now the light body is able to pour through the physical body the unprocessed portions of past experiences that had laid dormant in their energy field. And it enters the cells of the body. And then the body can process it as it naturally would. So we're going to stop here. And in the next edition, we're going to dive deeper into the biological response, the physical responses to release, this transmission of energy that occurs when we move out of suppression and into what I call expression. So this transformational process can be summed up in a couple of words. We can say it's a shift from suppression to expression. It's a shift from freeze to flow. It's a shift from fear to acceptance. Okay, so we're going to describe, and we have touched on it in a past episode. I think it's episode 2 or 3. We talked about how the body reacts to suppressed energy moving through the body, but we're going to describe that event in much more detail in the next edition. So thanks for joining, and if there's anybody you feel could benefit from this material, please pass it on. And if you subscribe to this YouTube channel, you'll be sure to be notified of new editions. Thanks for joining. See you soon.